The purpose of this recording is to give an informal, high-level overview of the steps required to demonstrate the SAP AP solution. It includes demonstration preparation, non-PO invoice processing and OnBase workflow, including Outlook integration, PO invoice processing and OnBase workflow, and the SAP integration. This recording does not include the AnyDoc capture part of the demonstration. That will be recorded separately. So to begin the preparation for the demonstration, there's several things that you would have open and ready before you begin. First thing that I usually open is SAP. Click on the SAP logon icon on the desktop. You can either double click or hit enter to log into that specific SAP client. The user is demo user. The password is OnBase. Once logged in, you can minimize it and close the initial logon pad that opened up. We are also going to open Outlook, and the profile we can use is Cindy Smith's. We're going to go ahead and open the OnBase client. You can minimize Outlook. For the OnBase client, I'm going to log in as manager and password. Once that's open, minimize it, and I'm going to open the Unity client. For the Unity client, I'm going to log in as Allison Jones, password OnBase. Okay. Once Allison Jones' profile is open, under the personal pages is where we usually are going to begin the demo. Alright, further preparation of the demo. Usually what I do is I go ahead and I dip in the files that would have been sent over from the capture portion of the demonstration that had already occurred. So I'm going to go into processing, go into dip, SAP AnyDoc invoices, right click and document import processor. I'm going to process the documents. It's going to bring in several different invoices into the system. And we do have to commit the batch to get these into the workflow. And I'm going to go ahead and commit selected. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the OnBase client. Now that was all in preparation of the demonstration. This is where the actual demonstration would begin. So if we access our personal pages and we do a refresh, we can see that a handful of different invoices have entered into OnBase. The first one is under Transferred to SAP. And what this is an invoice was brought in and it was a PO-based invoice. And the amounts on the invoice matched up with the amounts on the purchase order. And the rules we have set up in our particular workflow says that if those variables all match up, go ahead and post this directly into SAP. So for our process, it posted automatically. So at this point, I can actually access SAP and view this document. So we can access SAP, and the transaction to view a PO-based invoice is MIR4. And we should make note of our invoice number, 9956. Going to enter into it. where I can see the invoice that was created. I can also access the attachment list, where I'm going to have access to the invoice itself by double-clicking on the line. I'm presented with the invoice, and by double-clicking on the invoice, I can be presented with the related content, such as the packing slip, as well as the purchase order. So this is an example of straight-through processing, where an invoice was brought in, everything matched up, and it automatically posted. But let's go ahead and look at our other invoices. We have some that are waiting in an invoice coding queue, and those are going to be the invoices that are non-PO based, so we need to apply our GL accounts and our business units. We have amount discrepancies, so these are PO based invoices with exceptions. Whether it be dollar amount or header data doesn't match. And then we have another queue where one ended up with missing required documents. So let's go ahead and access into workflow. And as you can see, let's start with the PO-based invoices. Here lies the one that processed straight through. We have one that is in missing required documents, and right away when we click on this queue, we can see that it's missing the packing slip. And I'm actually going to take my related items and I'm going to place it down here for my demonstration. And I can see right away also it's missing the packing slip in the related items. We have access to the purchase order. Packing slip is missing. So at this point they can decide to go ahead and handle the exception and process it through. They can capture the missing document if they have the packing slip and they're ready to process it. We have two that have entered into amount discrepancies. So let's go ahead and process the first one that lies in this queue. As we can see right away, the invoice amount does not match the PO amount, and this note was placed onto the document automatically by the OnBase workflow. Down here we can see that the purchase order was in the amount of $301.08, and the invoice itself is for $311.05. So let's go ahead and handle this exception. I'm going to select the Handle Exception ad hoc task, and I'm going to be presented with a form. Now ideally the user would have two monitors so that the form can be on one monitor and the invoice can be on the other so they can reference each other. But I'm going to go ahead and maximize this form, and I can see a couple different things. I can see that freight was added in the amount of $9.97, where my original PO did not have freight applied to it. So at this point, the user can decide to either go and update the purchase order. They can remove the freight amount if they know that the vendor requirements state or the vendor contract states that we don't pay for shipping. I'm going to go ahead and save it as it is and process it through. Go ahead and close this. And I have a couple options. I can either submit for verification, so if I need another level of approval or another set of eyes on this before we post it through, I can do so. Or I can just go ahead and approve for processing. For our purposes, I'm just going to send it through to be processed. And here's our second one. Our second one also says the PO amount does not match the invoice amount. And as you can see over on the left, the invoice amounts do differ. I'm going to go ahead and handle this exception. Again, I'm presented with the form that shows the breakdowns. As you can see with the PO lines, this information was pulled in from SAP so we can compare the line items that were on the purchase order in comparison to the line items that were on the invoice. And we can see that in the purchase order for the first line I had a quantity of 11 that were on order, and it looks like with our invoice we're only invoiced for a quantity of 10, meaning that one of the items did not ship. So at this point we have a decision to make as a user. We can either adjust the purchase order to reflect the quantity of 10 that was billed to us, or we can submit and leave the purchase order as is if we're waiting for one more to arrive. I'm going to go ahead and save this invoice and post it into SAP as it is. So I'm going to go ahead and again approve for processing. Okay. Now if we access into our transfer to SAP queue, we can now see that there's 3 invoices in there, all with updated invoice numbers. So this information has been automatically sent over to SAP, and we can access this just as we did the one that automatically posted. So if we access SAP and we go to our MIR4 transaction, and let's look at invoice number ending in 58. Here's the 2 line items that we posted through, one with a quantity of 10, one with a quantity of 1. We can select the attachment list and access the invoice just as we did with the other one. As we can see, the note is present from SAP just as it was in OnBase. Double-clicking on the invoice will take you into the related documents, the purchase order as well as the packing slip. One thing to note about invoice processing is that this is just one possible configuration. If the end user has requirements where these invoices need to go to specific people, they can do so. If it's over a certain dollar amount, it can go to, a VP, or if it needs to go to the original buyer, it can do so. Now that we've finished the PO invoices, we're going to go ahead and access the non-PO invoices. We enter into our queue and there's 2 invoices that are waiting for coding. I'm going to go ahead and as my coding personnel, I'm going to assign accounts. I'm going to be presented with a coding form, and just as before, it's usually ideal to have a second monitor to place the form on so you can look at the invoice while you're doing the coding. I'm going to select Add, and I'm going to go ahead and code my information appropriately as it applies to the invoice. I'm going to select my GL account, the appropriate cost center, and the dollar amount that I want to disperse to that specific unit. Notice as I hit Tab, the items update in the header of the form. So the line item total is updated with 800, and I can see that I still have $88 from this invoice that I need to disperse. So I'm going to go ahead and add another line. And code appropriately. Enter in my final amount. When I hit Tab, the amount updates. And it's important to note that this form is customizable. So any sort of fields that they want to have on this form or calculated amounts, they can apply to it. It can be updated to whatever their needs may be. I'm going to go ahead and save my form and close it. And I'm going to submit this one for approval. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to code my last one. I'm going to assign accounts. I'm going to add a line, place it to the appropriate GL account, and enter my amount. Save the form and close. And I'm going to submit this one for approval as well. Now this, just as before, there can be multiple layers of approval depending, and it can be routed according to the vendor. It can be routed according to dollar amounts, and it can have multiple layers. So if you need 5 different layers of approval, that can occur. So at this time, as a manager, I may not be someone who accesses OnBase often, and I may not access SAP often, but I do access Outlook constantly. So as an administrator or a manager, I can automatically be sent the approvals that I need to do directly to my inbox. So as you can see, the 2 invoices that we processed and sent to a manager to approve have been added to the Outlook inbox for this manager. They can go ahead and open up the email that was sent to them. They can see the vendor number and the amount. And the message in this email can be specified. It's customizable. We're going to go ahead and select our workflow task pane, and what this is going to do is this is going to connect us into OnBase seamlessly. So it doesn't even look like I'm leaving my Outlook at all, and I'm doing my work right from my Outlook email that I've received. On the right, I'm presented with all the actions that I can take. The first action that we have configured is Review Invoice. So if I select Review Invoice, I'm going to be presented with 2 things. I'm going to be presented with the coding form to show me how this specific invoice was dispersed. And I'm also presented the invoice itself, so I can verify the information on the invoice as well as how it's been coded. Now if I have appropriate permissions, if this needs to be changed, I can change it. So if this was not supposed to be corporate services and it was supposed to be energy, I can go ahead and save that if I have appropriate permissions, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and change that and say it's good to go. I'm going to go ahead and approve this one. And at that time I can delete this email and of course move on to the second one. Workflow task pane. I'm going to review my invoices to make sure they are what I need them to be. Coding form, and the invoice is right behind there. And this one is exactly how I want it to be, so I'm just going to go ahead and close those, and I'm going to go ahead and approve. Now if I needed to send it back for adjustments, I could choose adjustment required, or if I wanted to decline it, I could do that as well. But for our purposes, we're just going to approve it. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that email. Okay. Now with our steps in the process, we could send it to another level of approval in OnBase, but maybe we're a user that has an AP clerk that never goes into OnBase and they live and breathe in SAP. And they don't want a non-PO invoice to post into SAP without them looking at it. So what we are able to do, if the business process requires it, is we can send that non-PO invoice data over to the SAP worker's inbox. So that those 2 invoices that the manager just approved have been sent over to SAP. So if I access the SAP business workplace as an AP clerk and I go into my inbox, I can see that I have 2 invoices in my queue. And these are the invoices that were coded, approved by a manager, and sent over to SAP. But to eliminate any further entry, we've captured those data elements and sent them over. So by double-clicking on the line, I'm going to be presented with the invoice itself. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that, and I'm going to enter into my SAP transaction. And as you can see, the data elements are pre-populated for me. So it's company code is already present, and if I click enter, all the coding information that was captured in OnBase and approved by the manager in OnBase through the Outlook integration has been sent over and pre-populated for me. So I can just simply look at the invoice, look at the information that's populated in the screen, and then post through if appropriate. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save on my screen. And SAP is just going to require me to validate some information. So it's going to highlight this field, and I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard a couple times It's going to tell me that my tax amount has not been applied. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And at this time, SAP is going to go ahead and create that invoice for me. So as an AP clerk working out of the SAP workers inbox, I didn't have to enter in anything. The data that was initially coded and approved and sent over was automatically populated. I just verified it and saved it. So as we can see, document 190076 was saved. If I refresh my inbox, that one leaves my queue. And I can go ahead and go into the second one, where I'm going to be presented again with the invoice, and double clicking gives me access to any, cross-reference document. So as you can see, we can even access the originating coding form. And I'm going to go ahead and process this invoice. And I think that this is all good, so I'm going to hit save and enter through the little SAP warnings. And document 77 was produced. Hit refresh. Now if we want to view this as an SAP end user, accessing a non-PO based invoice is transaction FB03. It's also saved here in the favorites. As you can see, it automatically populates the last invoice that was created. I'm going to click enter, and I can access not only the saved invoice in SAP, but also as an attachment. We've attached that originating invoice to complete the circle. So they have access to the data as well as the invoice, and they can even have access to the coding form if that's a requirement. Now if we go back into our SAP system and we refresh our life cycles, we can see the different pieces of information have been updated. So the two invoices that we sent over to SAP, the invoice number has been updated on them. And this is important because if you have users that are going to be searching on these invoices outside of SAP, updating that data on the document with SAP values is going to be important. So as you can see, the invoice number has been applied to the document itself, not only for the non-PO based invoices, but also for the PO based invoices. Now, that would end the demonstration. That shows the PO based invoices and the non-PO based invoices using the Outlook integration, demonstrating automatically posting directly in SAP, and also demonstrating sending over the data to the worker's inbox as a possible solution to the process. Now, you don't have to send it over to the SAP worker's inbox, as we've demonstrated. If they want to do all the approval in OnBase and then send it directly over in post, that is a possibility for them. We were just showing the different available actions that they can do if that's part of their business process. So to prepare for another demo, usually I like to clean up the transactions if you're going to show this again. So at this point, after you finish demonstrating, I usually highlight all of the invoices and remove from processing out of each of the queues. So I'm going to go into the one that's in missing required document, and I'm going to remove it from workflow. It's going to ask me to enter notes, but I can just hit OK. It moves it down to remove from processing, and I'm going to remove it. I'm going to go to my transferred to SAP, highlight those invoices, and remove them. And we're at the stage where we can go ahead and dip in the invoices again and then start the process over. Also, when I'm finished demonstrating, I usually like to close everything out. So I'm going to close out of the Unity client, close out of the SAP client just by yellow arrowing back. I usually like to close out of Outlook, and usually when you first open Outlook, verify that there's not an excessive amount of emails in there. It looks a little bit better to have minimal emails and have two magically appear. I'm going to go ahead and close out of Outlook, and I'm also going to close out of Unity client just for the next person who comes in to do the demonstration. If you have any questions about the demonstration that you've just seen, you have a couple different resources. You can contact Crystal Legan, Robert Kraus, Julie Rush, and Ian Waiton, and there may be a couple others, but between those people we should be able to help you out. Thank you.